was a tale in the outskirts of a forgotten town, one so old and whispered that even the wind seemed to carry it on cold, sleepless nights. They called it the Watcher, a creature that only appeared in the dead of night, tall and impossibly thin, with skin darker than the shadows it blended into. Its eyes were the only thing anyone ever saw, two small pinprick orbs of glowing white that pierced the blackness like twin beacons of dread. No one knew where it came from. Some said it was a punishment from an ancient curse. Others claimed it wasn't from this world at all. But there was one rule everyone in the town followed without question: never look directly into its eyes. Kira heard the stories all her life, but she never believed in them. Legends, she thought. Just a way to scare children into staying indoors. But one night, as the moon hid behind thick clouds, Kira found herself walking home later than usual. The air was unnaturally still, and the trees on either side of the road loomed like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. The only sound was her own hurried footsteps. Halfway through the dark stretch of road, she felt it, a chill that crawled up her spine and settled in her bones. It was as though something was watching her. She quickened her pace, heart pounding in her chest. Suddenly, a flicker of movement in the periphery of her vision made her stop. She turned her head, and there it was, standing just beyond the edge of the trees. It was impossibly tall, its limbs long and spindly, and its body seemed to blend with the night. But what caught her breath were its eyes, two tiny glowing white dots staring at her, unblinking. She froze, every muscle in her body locked in terror. The Watcher stood motionless, its gaze never leaving her. The stories rushed back to her mind. Never look into its eyes. But she had, and now she couldn't look away. It moved, slowly at first, its limbs bending in unnatural angles as it stepped closer, its head tilting in a way that felt almost curious. The closer it came, the colder the air grew. Kira tried to scream, but no sound came out. She tried to run, but her legs refused to move. All she could do was stand there as the Watcher loomed closer, its eyes burning brighter. When it was mere inches away, it crouched down, towering over her despite being hunched. Its face was featureless except for those glowing eyes, which now seemed to pulse with a sickly light. Kira's breath came in shallow gasps as its hand, a long, bony claw, reached out, grazing her arm with a touch that was ice cold. And then it whispered. The voice wasn't like anything Kira had ever heard. It was low, rasping, and echoed in her mind as if it were speaking from inside her head. "I see you," it said. "I've always seen you." Suddenly, she felt it. The cold was no longer just on her skin. It was inside her, crawling through her veins, freezing her from the inside out. Her vision blurred, but the eyes of the Watcher remained clear, burning brighter than ever. She could feel something changing, twisting as if the Watcher's gaze was unraveling her very being. Her body moved on its own, turning slowly away from the figure and walking back toward her home. But she wasn't in control. Her mind screamed, but her lips stayed silent, her legs stepping mechanically forward, while behind her, the Watcher's eyes bore into her back. From that night on, Kira was never the same. She spoke less, her once warm and joyful presence now cold and distant. But what was most unnerving was how she avoided all mirrors and windows. If you looked closely enough, you could see why. In the reflections, hiding just behind her, were two small, glowing white eyes. And they were always watching. I swear the folder wasn't there the night before. I'm not the kind of guy who keeps a messy desktop. I'm almost obsessive about it. Clean folders, everything in its place. So when I powered up my laptop that morning and saw a new folder sitting right there, bold and unassuming, I froze. Unknown user. That was the folder's name. At first, I thought maybe it was a prank. My friends are the tech-savvy type, and I'd left my laptop at their place a few days ago. Maybe they got drunk, installed some creepy software to mess with me. But it didn't make sense. They wouldn't go this far for a laugh. I clicked on it. Nothing. It didn't open, didn't load. Nothing changed on my screen. Just this weird moment of hesitation, like the laptop itself was considering whether or not to let me in. And then a line of text appeared across the top of the screen. You've been chosen. I blinked. Was it a pop-up? A message from some app? Maybe a virus? Before I could react, the folder disappeared, vanished like it was never there. I leaned back in my chair, laughing nervously. Of course it had to be a virus. Maybe I'd clicked something shady online. But as soon as I opened the browser to do a search, the screen flickered. Don't search. It's pointless. The words flashed across my screen in bold red letters. They lingered there, pulsing, as if the computer itself was taunting me. I closed the browser window and immediately shut down the laptop. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This wasn't funny anymore. Maybe it was a hack, something serious. I grabbed my phone and called one of my friends. But before I could dial, my phone lit up. Unknown number. I told you, it's pointless. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. There was no way something was listening, right? But I couldn't shake the feeling that my laptop, my phone, hell, maybe even my house wasn't just compromised. It was watching me. I didn't touch my laptop for the rest of the day. I didn't even open my phone. Every little noise made me jump. Every creak in the walls, every gust of wind rattling the windows. By the time night rolled around, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. No one could hack a laptop that fast and interact with me in real time. It had to be some advanced phishing scam or something. I decided I'd take the laptop to a professional in the morning. Until then, I needed sleep. I locked the laptop in a drawer and crawled into bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to a soft, persistent sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the drawer where I'd locked my laptop. I froze. The rational part of my brain told me it was just a random creak, maybe the house settling. But that tapping had a rhythm. It wasn't random. I got up slowly, heart hammering in my chest. The tapping continued, soft but steady as I approached the drawer. I could see the faint glow of light coming from the seams. The laptop was on. I hadn't left it on. With trembling hands, I unlocked the drawer and pulled it out. The screen was bright, and there was a single file open. It was a text document. You can't hide from me. Beneath that line was a series of photos. The first was of me standing at my desk staring at my laptop from earlier this morning. The second was of me in bed, tossing and turning, unaware of anything. The third was a picture of me standing right there in front of the open drawer. The laptop clicked off before I could react. By now I was convinced that someone had hacked my webcam or installed malware, but that didn't explain how it seemed to know where I was even when my laptop was off. I unplugged the computer and removed the battery. If someone was controlling it remotely, that would stop them, right? Yet even as I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My eyes kept darting to the corners of the room, as if expecting to see someone or something standing in the shadows. That's when I noticed a new sound, a faint buzzing, not from the laptop, but from my phone. My screen was lighting up again, over and over, as if someone was calling. I picked up with shaking hands, a new number this time, but the same message appeared on the lock screen. "I see you." I tried turning the phone off, but it wouldn't respond. It just kept buzzing in my hand like it was alive. Then, before my eyes, a new message appeared, this time from my own number. "It's too late. You're already part of the game." My vision blurred. I had to sit down before I collapsed. My heart was racing so fast, I thought I might pass out. This wasn't normal. This was something else. Something I didn't understand, and no amount of logic could explain. That's when the voices started. They were faint at first, barely whispers, but growing louder with each passing second. I couldn't make out the words, just a constant stream of unintelligible noise. I clutched my head, trying to block them out, but they wouldn't stop. I slammed my phone against the wall, watching as it shattered into pieces. For a moment, the room went silent again, but the relief didn't last long. A soft chime echoed through the room. My laptop, battery removed, still locked in the drawer, had powered itself on. By now, I had to be losing my mind. I grabbed my laptop, fully prepared to smash it to pieces, but as I held it over my head, ready to throw it down, something caught my eye on the screen. A video call had opened up. No name, just a black screen, as if whoever was on the other side was watching from the shadows. For a moment, I stood frozen, staring into the pixelated blackness. Then, slowly, a face began to emerge from the void. My face. But it wasn't a reflection. It was me standing in my living room. I watched as the figure on the screen raised its hand, mirroring my movements. But the smile on its face wasn't mine. It was twisted, wrong, like a distorted version of myself. Then it spoke.
"Don't you get it? This isn't a hack. This isn't some game you can win."
The figure on the screen leaned closer, filling the entire display with its face.
"I'm inside you now."
For days after that, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every electronic device around me felt like it was pulsating with life, waiting to strike again. I trashed the laptop, bought a new phone, and even stayed at a hotel for a while, thinking I could escape whatever it was. But it didn't matter. Wherever I went, I felt that presence, watching, waiting, controlling. It wasn't long before I started seeing the figure in reflections, mirrors, windows, even in the glossy surface of a car. The twisted version of me, always lurking just out of reach, smiling that horrible smile. It didn't speak again, but it didn't have to. I knew what it wanted. It was taking over. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. My mind is unraveling. I can barely tell what's real anymore. Is this my hand typing these words? Or is it his? If you're reading this, maybe you've already seen the signs, the strange messages, the eerie glitches, the reflection that doesn't quite match. Maybe you think it's just the virus, just some glitch in your system, but it's not. They're already inside, and soon they'll be coming for you. Final note: the story you just heard may seem like fiction, but be cautious the next time you notice something strange on your device. Sometimes, the things we rely on to connect us to the world can also connect us to something far more sinister. Whatever you do, don't open the folder. It's already too late for me. It was well past midnight when I finally arrived at the Elmwood Hotel. The journey had been long and the roads winding through dark, unfamiliar territory. By the time I reached the hotel, I was utterly exhausted, my eyelids heavy and my body aching from the hours spent behind the wheel. The Elmwood was the only place I could find in this remote area, a grand old building that seemed to have been plucked straight from a different era. Its faded brick facade and dimly lit sign were barely visible in the fog that clung to the night. I stepped inside, grateful for the warmth of the lobby, which contrasted sharply with the chill outside. The place was quiet, eerily so. The front desk was manned by a single clerk, an elderly man with thinning hair and a weary expression. He looked up as I approached, offering a tired but polite smile. "Welcome to the Elmwood Hotel," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "How can I help you?" "I'd like a room for the night," I replied, my voice sounding just as tired as I felt. The clerk nodded and reached for a large, dusty register on the desk. He flipped through the pages, his fingers moving slowly, almost methodically. After a moment, he looked up at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Not many guests this time of year," he remarked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "But we do have a room available, room 714. He handed me an old-fashioned key, the kind with an ornate metal tag attached. The number 714 was engraved on it, worn but still legible. "Your room is on the 7th floor, the clerk said, pointing towards the elevator at the far end of the lobby. "Enjoy your stay." I thanked him and made my way to the elevator, my footsteps echoing in the empty lobby. As I rode up to the 7th floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The hotel had a strange, musty smell, and the decor was outdated. Faded wallpaper, dim lighting, and threadbare carpeting that seemed to belong to a different time. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a dimly lit hallway that stretched out before me. The walls were lined with old paintings, their colors muted, and their frames tarnished with age. The carpet underfoot was thick, but the pattern had faded and worn in places. I glanced at the numbers on the doors as I walked, each one labeled with a brass plate: 710, 711, 712, but there was no sign of room 714. The hallway seemed to go on forever, the lights growing dimmer the farther I walked. Just as I was beginning to think I had made a mistake, I spotted it, a door at the very end of the hallway, almost hidden in the shadows. A brass plate on the door read 714, though the numbers were slightly askew, as if the plate had been hastily attached. I hesitated for a moment, a strange feeling of unease settling over me, but I was too tired to care. All I wanted was to collapse into bed and get some rest. I inserted the key into the lock and turned it, the mechanism clicking softly as the door swung open. The first thing that struck me about room 714 was how old-fashioned it was. The furnishings were all impeccably clean, but they looked like they hadn't been updated in decades. The bed was a massive four-poster with heavy drapes that hung down on all sides. The wallpaper was a deep burgundy with an intricate floral pattern, and the carpet was a rich, dark green. A large wooden wardrobe stood against one wall, and an ornate vanity with a round mirror occupied the opposite corner. The room was illuminated by a single dim lamp on the nightstand, casting long shadows across the room. There was a television, but it was one of those old boxy models from the 1980s, sitting on a wooden stand near the foot of the bed. The air was cool, almost cold, and there was a faint smell of mothballs and something else, something I couldn't quite place. Despite its age, the room was spotless. The bed was neatly made, the linens crisp and white. The wooden furniture gleamed in the soft light, free of dust or grime. It was as if the room had been preserved in time, untouched by the years that had passed outside its walls. I sat my bag down on the bed and let out a deep sigh of relief. My exhaustion had overtaken any feelings of unease I might have had, and all I could think about was getting some sleep. I quickly changed into my pajamas and climbed into bed. The mattress was firm, but surprisingly comfortable. As I lay there staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the room. It was too quiet, too still, as if the air was holding its breath. But fatigue won out, and before I knew it, I had drifted off to sleep. I don't know how long I slept, but I was jolted awake by the sound of a phone ringing. The noise was sharp and piercing, echoing through the silence of the room. I sat up, disoriented, and looked around, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. It was an old rotary phone, sitting on the nightstand next to the table. I hadn't noticed it before. It blended in with the rest of the room's outdated decor. The phone continued to ring, insistent and demanding. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something compelled me to pick it up. I lifted the receiver to my ear, expecting to hear a voice on the other end. But there was nothing, just silence. I waited for a moment, my heart pounding, but still no one spoke. Just as I was about to hang up, I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible over the crackling static.
Please help me.
The voice was distant, distorted, as if it were coming from a great distance. I felt a chill run down my spine as I strained to hear more, but the line went dead. I quickly hung up the phone, my hands trembling. The room felt colder now, the shadows longer and darker. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand. It was just after 3 a.m. The unease I had felt earlier had returned, stronger than before. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the room, that something was watching me from the darkness. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a prank call, a glitch in the phone system. But as I lay back down, I couldn't shake the image of the voice on the other end, pleading for help. The television flickered on by itself, the screen filled with static. I bolted upright, staring at the old boxy TV in disbelief. The remote was on the nightstand, untouched. I grabbed it and tried to turn off the TV, but the screen remained lit, the static hissing softly. And then, through the static, I saw something, a figure, faint and shadowy, standing in the center of the screen. The image flickered and jumped, but the figure remained unmoving. I couldn't make out any details, but it was clear that the figure was a person watching me through the screen. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the screen, unable to look away. The figure began to move, slowly at first, and then more quickly, as if approaching the camera. I fumbled with the remote, my hand shaking, and finally managed to turn the TV off. The room was plunged into darkness, the silence deafening. I sat there in the dark, my heart racing, trying to make sense of what just happened. Had I imagined it? Was it some kind of glitch, a trick of the light? But deep down I knew that wasn't the case. There was something wrong with this room, something deeply, terribly wrong. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep after that. My nerves were shot, my mind racing with fear and confusion. I needed to know more about this room, about what was happening here. I got out of bed and began to search the room, hoping to find something, anything that would explain the strange occurrences. I checked the wardrobe first, half expecting to find something hidden inside, but it was empty, save for a few wooden hangers that cluttered together as I opened the door. The vanity was equally bare, its drawers containing nothing but dust. Finally, I turned my attention to the bed. I lifted the mattress, expecting to find nothing, but my heart skipped a beat when I saw it. A small leather-bound book wedged between the mattress and the box spring. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat and precise, the ink slightly faded with age. The first entry was dated nearly 50 years ago. July 3rd, 1972. I've checked into room 714 at the Elmwood Hotel. The journey was long and I'm exhausted, but there's something about this room that doesn't feel right. The air is heavy, and the shadows seem to move on their own. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read the entry. It mirrored my own experience so closely that it was uncanny. I flipped through the pages, skimming the entries, and found that they all told similar stories. Guests who stayed in room 714 all reported strange occurrences, the feeling of a sense of unease that grew stronger with each passing day. As I continued reading, I noticed that the entries grew increasingly frantic. The handwriting became more erratic. The guests reported hearing voices, seeing figures in the shadows, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. Some entries even mentioned the phone ringing in the middle of the night, just as it had for me. But it was the final entry that sent a wave of cold fear through me. August 15th, 1983. I can't take it anymore. The voices won't stop, and the figure in the TV keeps getting closer. I try to leave the room, but the door won't open. It's as if the room is alive, trapping me inside. I don't know how much longer I can last. If anyone finds this diary, please help me. Get out while you still can. The entry ended abruptly, the final words trailing off into a jagged line. I stared at the page, my mind racing. The person who had written this diary, what happened to them? Had they ever escaped the room? Or had they vanished like so many others? A sudden knock at the door startled me, and I dropped the diary, my heart leaping into my throat. I stared at the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. Who could it be at this hour? And why did they knock so softly, so deliberately? The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly approached the door, every nerve in my body screaming at me not to open it. With trembling hands, I reached for the doorknob and turned it. The door swung open, revealing nothing but an empty hallway beyond. There was no one there, No sign of anyone having been there at all. The hallway was dark and silent. The shadows stretched out into the distance. I stepped back into the room, my mind spinning. The diary laid on the floor where I had dropped it. The pages fanned out as if in silent accusation. I knew then I couldn't stay in this room any longer. I had to leave, had to get out before whatever force was at work here claimed me as its next victim. I grabbed my things, stuffing them haphazardly into my bag. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely manage to zip it closed. I needed to get out of this room, out of this hotel, and as far away as possible. But as I reached for the door, I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. The room seemed to close in around me, the air growing heavy and thick. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and twist, reaching out towards me with grasping fingers. The phone rang again, the sound sharp and piercing in the silence. I ignored it, yanking the door open and stepping into the hallway. The air out here was just oppressive, the dim light flickering overhead. I made my way to the elevator, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The ride down to the lobby felt agonizingly slow, the elevator creaking and groaning with each floor it passed. I watched the numbers tick down, my heart racing with each one. When the doors finally opened, I nearly ran into the lobby. It was empty, just as it had been when I arrived. The night clerk was gone, the front desk abandoned. I hurried outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap in the face. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the empty street beyond. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I got into my car and drove away, the tires screeching on the pavement as I sped down the road. I drove what felt like hours, the hotel receding into the distance behind me. Only when I was miles away did I finally pull over, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. The hotel was behind me now, but the memory of that room, of the diary, of the strange occurrences that had plagued me throughout the night would stay with me forever. The next morning, I stopped at a diner in a nearby town, hoping to gather my thoughts and maybe find some answers. As I sipped my coffee, I overheard a conversation between two elderly men at the counter. They were talking about the Elmwood Hotel. "You hear they're finally tearing it down?" one of them said, his voice raspy with age. "About time, too. That place has been a blight on this town for years." "Yeah," the other man replied. "Too many strange things happened there. People vanishing, stories of ghosts. Some folks even say there's a room that didn't exist, room 714. I felt a chill run down my spine. I leaned forward, unable to stop myself from interrupting. Excuse me," I said, my voice shaky. "Did you say room 714? The men turned to look at me, their expressions weary. "Yeah," the first man said slowly. "Why?" I stayed there last night," I stammered. The men exchanged a glance, their faces pale. "You must be mistaken, son," the second man said. "That room's been closed off for years. They sealed it up after what happened." "What happened?" I asked, my heart pounding. The first man sighed, shaking his head. "It's just a story, but they say a man stayed there once, years ago. He vanished without a trace, but not before leaving behind a diary. People who read it say it's cursed, that it drives you mad." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The diary, the phone calls, the figure in the TV. It had all been real, but the room itself, was it real? Or had I been caught in some twisted supernatural trap? I never found out for sure, but I knew one thing, that I would never set foot in the Elmwood Hotel again. Some places are best left forgotten. their secrets buried in the past where they belong. As I left the diner, the sun shining down on the road ahead of me, I couldn't help but glance back over my shoulder, half expecting to see the outline of the hotel in the distance, but it was gone, as if it had never existed at all. And maybe, in a way, it hadn't.